take our size of city, about 70,000 people, blow that up to how many people do we have in Paris? Do you guys know? I'm putting you on the spot. What's the population of Paris? 12 million. And there are 2 churches for every 70,000 people. So that would be like all of Jackson for just 2 churches. Incredible amounts of lostness, yet haunted by the gospel. Places where Christianity had just thrived centuries ago and now covered in lostness. So we are thankful for David and Nicaea and their courage to go to a difficult place and do difficult work. So they need really no introduction. I'm going to try to save some time for you guys and just hand it straight over to you. There will be a time for question and answer at the end. So if you have questions, be thinking on those, write them down, and you'll have time to ask them soon.
Well, thank you. It has been an encouragement for us to be back. Just first want to say thanks for the way that you guys have taken care of us and loved on us and cared for us, not since we just came back to the States, but since we left the States. We knew when we were leaving that churches don't, or missionaries don't have what First Baptist gives to the people that they partner with. Knew that from experience, from knowing other missionaries and all that sort of stuff. And all the last 4 years has done is to affirm that. Paul in Philippians talks to the church at Philippi about being partners in the gospel, yoke fellow, partakers in the work, and that is very much how we see First Baptist, and we are so thankful for you. Also thankful for those that invested time and sweat and a lot of work at the Union House where we're staying and for the car that we're driving and all that. You guys have been an incredible blessing to us, and we're incredibly thankful for you. We are both battling colds, and so you'll have to forgive us for that. But as Douglas said, Paris is a city of about 12 million people. We'll have a couple of slides on that. Really, tonight we want to walk through what the last 4 years has been, and then, Lord willing, what the next couple of years will be. But also, as Douglas said, please feel free at the end. We'll be happy to ask whatever questions and kind of answer anything that you might have in that direction.
We have a slide presentation.
Was that you or was that me?
Okay, so you can see here how our family has grown. The first picture on the left was the summer right before we left in 2019. And then the second picture on the right was taken at our Thanksgiving celebration in November. So you can see how the kids have grown up.
I didn't realize I'm wearing the same thing. Yeah, I figured you would.
Okay. So this is this picture are the adults of our Paris team. So we have 10 units, which a unit is like either a family or a couple or a single person, a family, family. So we have 5 career units. 3 of those are families, and then we have 2 single career, a man and then a lady that are both singles. We have 5 midterms. So David will talk about this a little bit, but David is the leader of the southern hub of Paris. We have 4 journeymen. The 2 girls on the front on the right, the guy in the blue plaid in the center, and then the guy that's between David and me. Those are our 4 journeymen. They got there in December of a year ago, and they're finishing up at different times, but around December, this next December. And in total, we have 14 adults and 10 kids on our team. So people ask us what a normal French person looks like. Do they really just walk around with their baguettes and wine, wearing their beret? So we thought we'd show you what one actually looks like. Props to whoever did this picture, because I just think that's great.
John David, please don't let it get stuck on this one. Yeah, we skipped a couple. I think I accidentally advanced it too much. Go ahead and start explaining.
Okay, so the slide, here it is. So this is the Paris area, what's called the Île-de-France. The dark pink in the center is what you would think of Paris proper. So Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame, Sacré-Cœur, all those things. The light pink around that is considered like the little crown, is what they call it. And then the medium pink is the big crown. So we live in the Haute-Seine, which is the number 92. We live just south of Paris proper, and pretty much right on that line between the 92 and 94. Basically, it's zip code areas.
So this slide just shows what growth was between really 2013, 2019. Basically what it shows is that people are moving out of Paris proper. The thing that's interesting about this is that this was before COVID. Since COVID, particularly families have learned the value of having some green space. And so this number, whenever they update it, is only going to go up. But what you can see for our department, it's called Haute-Seine, but it looks like Hauts-de-Seine. During that time period, there was an increase in population of about 1.7 million. Whenever this is updated, that number will only have gone up. And so we're in an area that is growing, mainly because it's an area that is easy to commute into Paris. Our team leader, our current team leader arrived about 2 years ago, and Paris is known within the IMB as a global city. Meaning that it's a city that's being targeted by the IMB for work because in a city like Paris, the nations are coming to Paris. You can find pretty much any nationality and honestly, a lot of unreached people groups that are in Paris. So the framework for our team is that we have different targets. We live in that circle towards the bottom. We give leadership to the southern target hub. The area there in the far west is where the other target hub that is currently established, in that people from our team live there. They haven't really started work per se. Most of them are still in language school. But all of these areas that you see here are areas that long term we will target. So Lord willing, we'll have a team there in Paris proper, and also towards the eastern part of Paris. All of these are massively unchurched areas, heavily populated areas, and so there's a significant need. There's also a significant need for the area outside of Paris, so outside the large crown, but we're kind of taking it one step at a time. So Lord willing, by 27, for sure those 4 target hubs, there may be an additional one, but the idea is that those would all have teams ministering in those areas by that point in time. The southern target hub is the one that is furthest along, and really that's just because we've been there the longest, and so we've been out of language school and we've been able to start working in that area. John David, I can't get it. There it goes. This slide is helpful because this is from the IMB's Foundations document, which I know all of you have read and just loved. It's a very exciting read, especially for the youth. I know you've loved it. It's Percy Jackson and then Foundations. But one of the things that is really helpful for this is understanding what the IMB's approach is to going into an area, and then anytime we go into an area, we're already thinking about how can we leave that area. Ultimately, we want to leave places, not because we got sick or because we had to come back because something happened, but because we're no longer needed in that area. So the IMB has identified 6 areas of the missionary task. We are very much in the entry phase. So we are in that first phase. But the thing to remember with this is that church planting is not a linear event. So it's not like you get done with evangelism and then you move on to discipleship. And then once you've gotten enough people discipled, you don't have to do evangelism or discipleship anymore. But we are very much at step 1. So the area that we live in, this is a dot of all the churches in Paris, kind of speaking towards what Douglas was talking about. When we were trying to think through where should we go, where should we live after language school, our team took all the evangelical churches that are listed with kind of this umbrella evangelical organization. So it doesn't mean we agree on everything. It doesn't mean they're a healthy church. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means they kind of agree to some basic evangelical principles, and they're part of this group. So we took all of those churches, got all of their addresses, threw it in an Excel document, put the Excel document in Google Maps, and these are all the churches in the Paris region. It looks like a lot, but the thing you have to remember is that this is for 12 million people. Currently in Paris, there is 1 church for every 30,000 people. To Douglas's point a minute ago, before we left, one of the numbers I heard about Jackson is that there are 200 churches in the greater Jackson area. I don't know if that statistic is accurate or not, but I've used it a lot, so I really hope it is. But if you were to take the numbers for churches that are in Paris and put those same numbers to Jackson, you wouldn't have 200 churches, you'd have 2. And the average attendance of that church would be about 50 to 100 people. And so you have this massive need for churches because people have access to the gospel in the sense that they can go buy a Bible. If they can go find information about the gospel on YouTube or whatever, it's in French. There's a lot of good material in French. But if your family is generations removed from believing that, and you have never met a person that would say they are active in their faith and they are actually looking to Jesus for their salvation, if you never come across those people, it's fair to ask the question, do they actually have access to the gospel? And so we feel, and we think the Bible strongly teaches, that local church is the best way for the gospel to spread eventually. The challenge is that we're still in that entry phase. And so much of what we're doing now is just simply trying to build relationships, get to know people, share the gospel. We have had teams come that help us with that, but for the most part, it's been pretty slow work. And in general, the typical French person would be agnostic or atheist. There is about 30% of the population that would say they're Catholic, but most of that percentage would say they're non-practicing Catholic. So it's not been uncommon in our experience to be talking to somebody, them tell us that they're Catholic, and so we start having conversation about the Bible, and they say, well, no, I'm atheist. Well, how somebody can be Catholic and atheist at the same time is a little bit confusing to me, but it's a consistent thing that happens in France. About 15% of the population is Muslim, and then you have a whole lot of nuns, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S, just saying they're not spiritual in any way, shape, or form. And so as you go and speak to people about the gospel, for people that have never really heard it, that don't know what it is, and then for a culture that has indoctrinated them to say that organized religion and certainly the Bible is something of the past and should be rejected. If you start with, in the beginning, God, for most of them, the conversation is just going to stop there. Now, the conversation goes a little bit differently with Muslims, but much of what our work has been doing is just trying to have as many gospel conversations as we can. For people that are willing to follow up, for us to follow up with them, we do what we call sit to share, which is really just trying to get to the point to where we can have coffee with somebody or whatever, to where we can sit down and have a fuller gospel conversation. Most of this term has been pretty painfully slow. It's not that we haven't had good conversations. It's not that the Lord isn't working and all that sort of stuff, but it's been pretty slow. The area that we ended up moving to is called, after language school, is called Boularen. It's basically Queensburg. The way that we ended up moving to this area is we took that Google map with all the different points in it, and then we identified, all right, where are the places where there are no churches? This was one of those areas. So kind of about halfway down that map, you can see kind of a main road that's doing a circle. That delineates Paris proper. So essentially from the southern part of Paris proper down towards the bottom of the map, and then kind of halfway through on the Google map, you've got one dot kind of basically halfway towards the bottom, and then over to the left. That's about a 5 square kilometer area. I realize we don't deal in kilometers here, so about 3.2 miles, James. I figured that would help you. So about a 3 square mile area with about 300,000 people, and as best we know, no evangelical church. I told you the number for Paris in general is that one church for every 30,000. For that department that Nikia told you, the Hauts-de-Seine, it's one church for every 51,000 people. So you really have about one church for the population of Jackson. So we ended up identifying this area, finding housing in this area, and so for the last 2 years, this is where we've been. This area, that 3 square mile area, is the southern Target hub. Our family moved there about 2 years ago, and then over the last 2 years, we've had 4 journeymen or singles come and work with us. They'll be heading out starting in October, and then one may extend all the way till next summer, but they've been an incredible help to us. But that is the general area where we live.
So here are a few pictures of the town where we live. The first picture on the left is our apartment building. So we live on the 3rd floor. It's a beauty. And then the 2 in the middle are just pictures of around town. One is our town hall or the mairie, and then the other one is near the Catholic church there. Both of those are just down the street from where we live. The picture on the right is the chateau at Parc de Sceaux. If any of you have ever been to Paris, it's in the south. It's about a 20-minute walk. It's about, 2 miles from where we live. But it's a very large park, and it's basically like a mini Versailles. So they have all the very, I don't know the word, like the manicured gardens and all that. But we spend a good amount of time there. We have some team meetings there when the weather's nice, and we go there try to meet people and all that. So that's just a little bit of where we live.
So in terms of ministry, the way that we've done that is we've tried to connect with people through just simple outreach, going out on the street and trying to talk to people, meet people, kind of just this idea of going out and trying to have conversation. I mentioned already the sit to shares. One of the things that we really want to see happen, we had hoped it would have already happened, but that we definitely want to see happen when we get back, is more of a come and see. So if you think about evangelism as going out and telling, we'd like to have something that would draw people in, that would be a natural place to have a conversation. We tried to do an English cafe and thought we were good to go, and some stuff happened with the location and we weren't able to find another location. But we'd like to find that thing that would give us just a more natural way to have conversation. As you can imagine, if you're walking down the street and somebody stops you and asks you to have a conversation, there's a decent chance just right off the bat you're going to tell them no. And that's in the polite South. Paris even more so, right? And so we want to have something that is just a more natural means for us to have conversation, be it something like an English cafe, be it something where people would come in to get tutoring, or just some natural way to meet people. The challenge has been trying to figure out, one, exactly what that thing is that's not already provided, but then secondly, finding the space to do it. Once people have found a little bit of what we believe and that sort of thing, there's been a little bit more resistance to people's willingness to host us in their building. But we really want that come and see type of activity. And then all of us, be it our journeymen, be it ourselves, we're part of what is known as associations in France. Think of it as some type of club. But in France, associations are a very important part of the culture, and there's an association for everything. Be it some type of sport, be it culture, be it music, be it dance, be it woodworking, be it book clubs, whatever it is, there is some type of association for it. So one of the ways that we've plugged into our community is just we're part of associations. I am part of a volleyball team. Nikea is part of a ballet dance exercise group. The kids do their sports activities and their music activities. Our journeymen are, one of our journeymen joined basically a senior citizens conversation club. So it's this 28-year-old guy that just shows up in this cafe, and it's a bunch of senior citizens that are just sitting around talking. But it's opened up some pretty neat doors for him to share the gospel, and as you might imagine, the elderly folks really appreciate it. It's this younger guy that's willing to invest his time in just sitting around and talking. And so he's gone to like one of the ladies' house to have coffee with her and her husband. As a team, we were training through 3 circles at the time. And so he was talking to me about, well, I don't really know what to talk to her about. And I said, well, in some senses, she's an English partner. And so he was learning 3 circles in French. I said, just go through 3 circles in French and ask her if this makes sense to her at all, and to correct all your French mistakes. And so he did that, and in a really natural way, he was able with this lady to walk through the 3 circles and share the gospel with her, all because he's willing to go sit and hang out in this cafe with this group of people that really, in a lot of senses, doesn't make sense for him to participate in. But associations are the most natural way for you to invest in your local community in French culture. And so we're all part of that. And then just basic friendship. It's hard to see, but that picture there on the bottom was us hosting some of our friends. It's some of Eden's friends from school, their parents. And so we invited them over for Thanksgiving. And French people, you might be surprised to know, don't celebrate Thanksgiving. They do, oddly enough, they do celebrate Black Friday on the same day. But we had them over because, again, one thing that is often reported about France and French culture, and particularly Paris, is that getting invited into people's homes is a challenge. There are several stories written about how people will live in the same apartment building for a decade and have no clue what their neighbor, either next door or right down the stairs from them, what their name is. So it's not that French people are rude, it's not that they're arrogant, it's not any of that. It's just French culture is a colder culture, and they don't just naturally invite people into their home. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is just invite people into our home, and if we're just the stupid Americans that invite people into their home, then we get the pass because we're stupid Americans, and that's okay. So we're going to lean into our ignorance. And it's not too hard to lean into that. Sometimes it just slaps you in the face. So we invited our friends over for Thanksgiving, and one of the good things about Thanksgiving is that at the core of Thanksgiving is giving thanks to God. And so we had brief conversation just sharing that, because they're interested to know what is the history of Thanksgiving. Well, as soon as you give the history of Thanksgiving, you're pretty quickly into some type of spiritual or gospel conversation. And so we do want to use just American events or American activities to try and bring people into our home. One of the more encouraging things that happened before we left is people that we've known for several years were starting to invite us to come into their home, which is a massive step. We'll talk about this in just a minute. But one of the things that we have consistently been told since we moved to France is that you can kind of do whatever you want to do during your first term, but when you're really going to gain trust is when you come back. Because particularly for IMB personnel, but just missionaries in general in Paris, we're a dime a dozen. We've come, we've gone. We've come, we've gone, we've come, we've gone. And all of us have had this incredible vision for French pastors of what they should do, and if they would just listen to us, then France would be reached by now. The problem is none of us ever stick around, and we're too quick to give our advice and not listen and then not come back. But also just with our neighbors, one of the first things we're asked when we meet people is, why are you here? And then how long are you staying for? Because as expats, Paris is a place where a lot of expats come. They come and do a job for a couple of years, and then they leave. And so one of our expectations, one of our hopes is that as we go back, both within our community, but then also within our local church and pretty much in every aspect, that we will have gained quite a bit of credibility just by simply coming back. Over the last 2 years, we've invested a lot of time in 3 primary areas. One would be our community, which is what I've talked about the most this whole time, but then also in a local church. We've been part of a local church the whole time. They've been incredibly gracious to us. It's in a town called Vitry-sur-Seine. It's a largely Muslim population and immigrant population that lives in that area. But our pastor went to the language school that we went to. He's Brazilian. He's an incredible man and has been a really good friend to me, and their family's been really good friends to our family. But they've allowed us to do a whole lot. About 2 years ago, he allowed me to start preaching pretty regularly in terms of the rotation. I also help with what is considered the youth group, but the youth group is 15 to 25 in France, and so when we got there, Nikkei and I were 37-ish, and they asked us if we wanted to be part of the young adult group, and I just kind of looked out and said, that ship sailed a long time ago. But we invested there. Nikkei helped with the children's ministry. Kids are involved in kind of what we would think of as youth group, but they've been incredibly generous and incredibly gracious. We've done evangelism training. In the Olympics, in the pre-Olympic stuff, which I'll talk about in just a minute, we're going to work in the neighborhood of our local church, and so we've heavily invested in that. And then the other area that I've invested in is just at the denominational level, of trying to gain trust with pastors in the Paris region. And so I've tried to meet with them, have coffee with them, spend time with them. Again, mainly just to build trust. And long term, we don't just want to see one church planted, we want to see churches planted. Our goal for our church plant is that it will be planted out of our local church that we're a part of. I do not want just us and our American team to plant a church. We want to plant that with people from our local church so that when people walk in, they won't just say, oh, look, a bunch of Americans are worshiping God. But it will be in French, it will be with French people, it will be for French people, and that's our goal. The challenge has been is that that's been a little slow. Pastors in the Paris region have a heart for church planting, but if you look at the number of churches around France overall, there's a massive need for church plants all over the country. In Normandy region, it is very common for people to have to travel 50, 60 miles to get to church because there's just not churches in the Normandy region. And there are a bunch of areas where that's the case. I don't think it has to be either or. I think it can be both and, because then you have these massive pockets where geographically there's not a big distance, like where we live and where the team in the West is in Paris. That is a heavily, densely populated area. But you've got hundreds of thousands of people and no churches. So geographically they're not spread out, but population-wise it is. So at the denominational level, I've been trying to invest and just encourage, love, get to know, and more than anything, learn from French pastors. So those are the three areas that we have largely focused on over the last 2 years. I'll do this one. One of the big things that is coming up is the Olympics. This slide looks like it got messed up a little bit, so it's hard to read. I'm sorry about that. But our team is going to be heavily involved in the Olympics. We are anticipating about 400 plus volunteers coming over the summer from 25 or more churches. And as part of that, we're going to have about 15 or so interns that are going to come for about 8 weeks to work with us. As part of that, there's activities that are going on before the Olympics, which honestly is the stuff I'm most excited about, because we're working with local churches in the neighborhoods of those local churches and investing in those communities. During the Olympics, there will be a lot of people coming into France, but most of the people that we will be trying to have conversations with during the Olympics are going to leave. And then after the Olympics, we don't think about this a lot, but the Paralympics are just as long as the Olympics. And that follows just on the heels of the Olympics. And so we'll also have a week or so where teams will be coming. But as you hear about the build-up to the Olympics, I would really appreciate it if you'd pray for our team. That first part, the pre-Olympics, we're not going to be there. But our team is going to be welcoming a lot of volunteers over 3 kind of week-long periods. And it's going to be a pretty tiring process for them. But also just praying that it would be a really, really fruitful time, one for the communities, but then also building relationships with the local churches. So as you hear about the Olympics, as you watch the Olympics, as you do all of that, please be praying for us. Some specific ways that you can be praying for us, Lord willing, as we head back in July. One would be that the Lord would just simply allow us to go back. That's our desire. That's where we want to be. We love being here, but that's where we feel like we're supposed to be. And so one of our big desires is just to get back. There's nothing that we're aware of that is stopping us from being able to do that. But all sorts of things can happen and have happened for a lot of people, and so please be praying for that. We desperately want to see people come to faith. When you walk around that area that I was saying, that 3 square mile area, basically every person that you see is an unbeliever and doesn't have a relationship with Christ. So 1 out of every 100 or 2 out of every 100 may be a believer, but you're just talking about massive lostness. I don't know that it's actually possible. I'm not aware of any church historians in the room, so I'll go with it. I'm not sure that a country can go from being post-Christian to pre-Christian, but as far as it relates to France, that's really where I feel like we are. Because France is so post-Christian that it's so far removed from the gospel that the gospel in the church is simply a relic from so far gone that the only thing they think about is buildings that people visit as tourist sites. So I don't know that it's actually possible to go back to being pre-Christian, but I feel like that's what the mentality is. And so pray that people will come to faith. Saturday morning, right now I'm reading through Isaiah. I was in Isaiah 60. And in Isaiah 60, the Lord talks about the restoration of Israel and how he's going to redeem them. And one of the phrases that the Lord uses in speaking of the people is he says that he's going to make of them oaks of righteousness. And for whatever reason, that phrase really stuck out to me on Saturday. And I just began to pray, Lord, please raise up oaks of righteousness in France. It's not that there aren't any. We have some incredible friends and pastors that are incredibly faithful, that love the Lord, are faithful in testifying to that. But we want to see a lot more oaks of righteousness. We'd love to see a whole forest of it. And so pray for openness, pray that people would listen, but even more so than listening, that people would believe and come to faith. Over this next term, our desire is to start the church plant. And so in order to have that, you've got to have a core team. You've got to have a couple of people that will come and join you. But we don't want a church plant where we're starting with 30 people. That may work well in the States, but when the median size of a church is somewhere between 20 and 50 people, we'll start much smaller. And the way that we are going to grow will be through evangelism, not through transfer growth. And so what we want to instill as part of the DNA of our church is that the way that we are going to grow, the way that we are going to survive as a local church, and Lord willing, the way that we will plant out of this church will be that we share the gospel, we disciple, we raise up and train leaders, and then we send them out. And so our desire is to be able to start, however weak and small, whatever it is, our desire is over this next term that we will be able to start the church plant. And then as we mentioned, we'll have new teammates come in. We don't have any idea who those are, but our journeymen are going to leave. The first one will leave in October. The next 2 will probably leave in December. And then the other one, Lord willing, will stay towards May or June. But we'll need to hire, bring in more journeymen. So if you know people, let me know. But that can be a slow process sometimes. It can be a challenging process. We always want to bring them in pairs, and so if a girl's coming, we want them to bring another girl with them. If a guy's coming, we want them to bring another guy with them. That's not an absolute, but it's a pretty strong preference for us. And particularly for guys, that can be a big challenge. Oddly enough, girls are pretty willing to go, and guys tend to be a lot harder to get to come. We are blessed with having 2 guys and 2 girls, and they are killing it. They are doing such a good job. They are meeting people that we don't have the ability to meet. They're talking to people. They're sharing the gospel. It's not easy for them. They did not receive the same amount of language that we received. They have all sorts of challenges, but they have been an incredible boost to what we are able to do. And really in the last couple months, it's felt like they've hit their stride. The problem is they're going to leave in about 6 months. And so just be praying for that transition. One, for them, because it's a pretty big transition for them. Most of them are thinking about long-term possibilities for missions, but seminary for most of them would be a requirement, and so all sorts of stuff can happen as people come back to the States, and so we want to support them in that. But there will also be a transition time where you're bringing in new people. They then have to go to language school for the short amount of time that we allow them to go to language school. Then they have to get plugged in and all that. You're kind of restarting the system with them. And so please be praying for that process. First Baptist, I really can't express to you guys how much we love you, how much we care about you, how much emails and messages and postcards and packages and phone calls, how much all of that has meant. It really is a constant encouragement. There are several things throughout our house. I was telling Louis, we get to think about Louis all the time because one year, Louis gave us a pepper grinder. And we have that pepper grinder in our house, and so every time we grind pepper, we think of Louis Haley. We have, I don't even know what you call it, that thing that's right by our door that has the Great Commission on it. It's one of the gifts you guys gave us as I left, and so every time we walk out the door, we're reminded of you guys. You guys love us so well, and we are incredibly thankful for you, and we certainly don't take it for granted. So, are there any questions that I could possibly answer? Yeah, so the question is, what is the process for somebody becoming a pastor in France in general? And the answer is that it's a pretty long process that can take 7 to 10 years until someone is like what's considered a fully certified pastor. And I'm all for theological training. I'm all for trying to prepare pastors to serve and all that sort of stuff. But about, maybe not half, but more than a third of the pastors in the Baptist Convention, there's like 114-ish churches in the Baptist Convention. Something like 40 or 50 of those are foreigners. So people like me, our Brazilian pastor, people from the UK, people from Africa have come into France to serve as a pastor. And in general, when people in the Baptist Convention hear about a missionary, they think of that as somebody that is coming in from the outside to pastor a church. There's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. The challenge is that you will never begin sending so long as your primary resource for pastors is receiving. And so long term, one of the things that I would love to be involved in is how do we raise up and train more pastors? There's all sorts of challenges for pastors in France. One from government not being supportive or helpful towards pastors, but then also the process itself is just long. And here in the States, sometimes people later in life feel a call to ministry, but as a general, at least in the past, as a general kind of culture, people felt the call to ministry at a pretty young age, and then they go to seminary pretty soon after they graduate, and then they're into the pastorate. Now, there can be a lot of problems with 24, 25-year-old having their NDiv and thinking they're completely prepared to pastor a church, right? But in France, people are responding to that call quite a bit later. So a good example is some of our closest friends who actually in about a month are going to come to visit us. They're going to come to church, and so you'll get to meet Benjamin and Pauline. But Benjamin, since the call to ministry when he was, I don't know how old he was, 28, 27, something like that. But he already had 2 kids and maybe 1 on the way. And the government gives him no resources in terms of unemployment or anything like that. And so his wife became the primary breadwinner. Benjamin went to school for the next 4 or 5 years. Then he had to do a year internship. Now he's what's basically a pastor on probation from the denominational level. And then you do that for 3 years, and then at that point, you can kind of, if you want to go to some other church, you can go that. So you've got this massive need for more and more pastors, but you've got a process that takes 7, 8, 9 years, and then you've got people later in life responding to that call to go into the pastorate, and so you can just see how there's a big problem there. And so it's something that we're praying about. It's not just something we're aware of. It's certainly something that at the denominational level, but even also just at the larger evangelical level that they're aware of. The question is what do you do, right? Because French really value their diplomas and their education, and it's good. But we also want to say, let's find a way to give a place for people to do their theological education, but let's also let them do that while they're working in a church alongside pastors. So there's not a whole lot developed and in practice at this point in time. And I am really far away from having the credibility within the denomination to really be able to propose a whole lot. That we want to what? No, so our desire is to plant over this. Yeah, good question. So the question is basically who decides at what point we can plant? And the answer is, I mean, in some senses, we could just do it. I don't want to go that route. I want to come alongside our local church and plant out of there. But we've been having those conversations with our pastor. He knows where we want to plant. We've already started a Bible study that essentially served as like a house group in our neighborhood. So some people from our church have already been coming to this Bible study. And our pastor is very aware that as we come back, that is our goal. Now, at what point we'll be able to start meeting, whether we'll start meeting like 2 Sundays a month or what exactly that will look like and when that official meeting will happen, probably what we'll do is when we get back, identify the people who our church is willing to release. Because in one sense, our pastor's all for church planning, but in some senses, he's all for it so long as I do it, right? And I'm okay with that, but we do want some people to come alongside us. Now, we're not going to ask for some of the top leaders or anything. If they happen to want to come, we'll be happy to have that conversation with them. But we do want a couple of people from the church, and so part of it's having the conversation with him, then meeting as a core team, identifying kind of our vision as a local church. We want the core team to be able to have input into that. Make sure training-wise that we're prepared to really start sharing the gospel in our community. And we want people that live close to our community, which there's some people from our church that do live in and around where we live. So it's a possibility. The question is just, do they want to be part of a church plant? So there's not like a system of rules, you have to do this and then this and this. But what we will do is we'll go back, and even before really start having those conversations. August is a dead month in France. French people go on vacation, so nothing productive in terms of work happens in August. And so really in September, and after we get through all the Olympic stuff, then we'll really start moving towards that. But I would love to have that core team in place by December and start meeting and talking and praying through that as a group of, let's say, 5, 6, 7 people. Where? At our local church? So the question is, are most of the people in our local church immigrants? Most of the people from our church are from French territories, be it Martinique, be it Guadeloupe. That would be where the bulk of them come. The reason for that is the previous pastor was Martinican. And he served there for over a decade, and so there was a large group of people from Martinique or Guadeloupe that were attracted to the church because of him. And so it's not largely immigrant. We do just have some traditional French people. The town that we live in is kind of upper middle class, so kind of traditional French. One town over, where Nikia showed you the slide of that chateau, that's a very upscale, very ritzy, very rich neighborhood. But then where the guys live is a town that about a 5-minute walk from their apartment has the largest mosque in the region. And so like the school where Eli goes to has a massive amount of North Africans, mainly North African, some Western African, but there's a large immigrant population not far from us. But in the town we live in, it's more what you might think of as traditional French. Bill? Please come.
Somebody in Paris, would their responses, as far as you know, be similar to that, or would there be significant cultural, historical differences?
Yeah, so the question is, so Bill's question is the response towards sharing the gospel largely atheistic, agnostic, that sort of thing? The answer is that it really depends on who you're talking to. You've got the reported percentage of the population in France, and Paris in particular, is 15% Muslim, but it's higher than that. So a conversation with a Muslim is significantly different from an agnostic atheist. But in general, yes, even for the people that are willing to have the conversation, do all that stuff, at the end, the polite thing to say is, well, I'm glad you found something that works for you. And so yeah, you do have, every culture has obviously things that they hold on to. There are massive implications here in the U.S. as a result of the American Revolution, things that we hold very dear. The same is true for France with the French Revolution. And two of the basic premise, and probably the most important premise of the French Revolution, was one, getting rid of the monarchy, which they did and they beheaded, but then also getting rid of the power and the influence of the Catholic Church because of their abuse of power and their abuse of influence that they had exerted over centuries. They were also quite successful in that area, so much so that for a period of time, Notre Dame was a temple to the god of Mars or something. It became a polytheistic temple for a season. So you have, as kind of a strong heritage of French culture, we kicked out religion. Certainly in terms of like strong top-down organized religion. And when you talk to people and ask them, you know, what are your oppositions to this? Or they'll come back to, there were a lot of wars that were fought in the name of religion. There was a lot of sex abuse that happened in the church. There was a lot of bad things that the church did. The older generation will also bring up the world wars and saying if a God did exist, he would never allow something like that to happen. But in general, yes. The interesting thing despite that is that one of the statistics we often share is that there are more Wiccan priests in Paris than there are pastors. And the psychic industry is like a 3 billion euro industry. And so, in a sense, yes, you've got this really strong cultural atheism, agnosticism, and yet you've got this also, a lot of people are trying to contact the dead, a lot of people are spiritual, but like one of the girls on my volleyball team we were at a tournament, and so had some time to talk and was asking her about stuff, and she would say she's very spiritual, but she doesn't like dogma. Basically meaning she doesn't like the rules of the church. I had coffee with a friend of mine from town. He's a physics professor at one of the Grandes Écoles, which is like the Ivy League level for Paris. And so he's a brilliant man. And we're talking to him and got into gospel conversation and all that sort of stuff. He's like, listen, I'm sorry, I don't buy it, don't believe it. But he did say to me during that conversation, he said, I will admit, though, that death really bothers me. And so there is this element where the feeling and the sense and the reality is that people are really hard to the gospel. The reality is we are in the South as well. That ultimately you need regeneration and spiritual resurrection. And the only way that's going to happen is through the miracle and the working of the Holy Spirit. And so, in a sense, yes, it's very, very hard ground. But I was encouraged by a pastor, this El Salvadorian guy that was speaking at Baptist Convention this last summer. And constant thing that's said about France is it's really hard spiritual ground. It's all this sort of stuff. And he's like, in a sense, that's true. But the gospel's the gospel. Stop saying it's hard ground. France is not any harder ground than anywhere else. So I do think there's a lot of truth to that. And so ultimately, people have questions that only the gospel can satisfy. We need to do a really good job at finding out what those questions are. But also, ultimately, there is an academic level, but there's religiosity here that is really, really, there's something refreshing about someone just telling you, no, I don't believe it, and moving on. Rather than saying, I believe it, but none of their life lines up with it, right? So there is an element of when you're talking to people and you're having however many conversations you have and everybody's just saying no, there's a part of that that's frustrating and challenging and can be discouraging and all that sort of stuff. There's another element of you know where people are. And so yeah, there's both sides to it. Julie?
So I think most of you know that here in my past life, I was a nurse practitioner. And when we went, I really did not feel like the Lord was asking me to give that up. That wasn't, I thought we were going to be back for a year every time. I thought somebody will give me a job for a year. But also, when we were at our training, people kept telling me, oh, you can find ways to use your medical background, like throughout your practice, throughout getting to know people there, to spread the gospel there. And that really, for the first 2 years, I did everything I could think of. I researched, I made friends with doctors, talked to nurses, and really, there's nothing that you can do in France. I feel like it's harder to do anything medical-wise in France without a license than even it would be here. So it was pretty discouraging. Had some long talks about that. But after we finished language school, so we finished language school in the summer of 21, and then when we went back, well, I guess it was January of 22, somebody called, one of our association leaders called David and just said, hey, the field medical coordinator for Europe, she and her husband are going to be retiring, and they wanted to know if Nikea would be interested in the position. And I tried to play it cool, and I just really, honestly, the way that I've explained it many times is just that I just really felt like that was the kindness of the Lord, because it was something that I do 100% feel like nursing and my medical background is a calling from the Lord. It's a way that it was a platform here in the States of having gospel conversations with people and seeing lives changed. And it was honestly something that I very much missed and still miss. I still miss the clinical side of things. But now, as field medical coordinator, I serve about 700 of our adults and kids in the IMB. In most countries in Europe. So it's easier for me to tell you that I do not have the European countries that border the Mediterranean Sea, but pretty much any other European country I serve. And a lot of it is just questions from our personnel and, if they don't know where to start, if they have something going on, or if they can't get what they need where they are, then I manage and I help get them to a location, whether it be a neighboring country, or most of the time that's in Europe, but our last resort is bringing them back to the States to get what they need. So it's been a good way that I can still use my medical background, and I really enjoy being able to help our people on the field stay on the field so that they can do what they're doing. So it's been really, really nice.
Right.
Yes, what are our kids doing? Well, so most days they go to school. School starts first week of September, and it goes until usually the first week of July. So their school year is a little bit different. In the elementary school, they do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So they do have an off day on Wednesday. And then junior high adds a half a day on Wednesday, and then high school goes 5 days a week. Yeah. So they are usually in school from 8:30 in the morning until 4:30 in the afternoon. So they do have a 2-hour lunch break. So they can come home for that. Not Nora. In middle school they don't, but in elementary school they have about a 2-hour lunch break that they can either stay there, eat there, and have a recess, or we go pick them up and they're with us for 2 hours in the middle of the day. So they don't come home much. I mean, okay, so what are some things that we miss about being here in the States? And then since we've been home here in the States for about a month, is there anything that we've missed about Paris? So I think just overall is just the familiarity of things. You know, you just until you're in another context like that where like you don't speak the language, you don't know the culture, you don't know the little cues of things, you know, I think that we have done a good job of helping each other kind of play it off, you know, of like, okay, this it's not a big deal, just laugh at yourself and go on. But you know, there are some times that gets really old of being like the outcast, of being the one that doesn't get it. You know, you can only like fake that you understood the joke so many times. But I think just that just things aren't easy. So like, you know, sending a note to a teacher at school is not easy. You know, we have to check to make sure our language is correct. You know, if we need to get some like work done on the car, it's not easy. Now that is becoming easier, but it's not easy. And so I think overall that's probably it. It's just, and of course, family and friends. I mean, we do miss the church. I miss our church here. There's just something about like hearing the gospel in your native tongue and being able to worship like in your native tongue that again, you know, it's fun, but after a while, you know, it's just, and really it's just one of those things until you come back to it, like you don't know how much you need it, of, you know, having to really pay attention in church to understand and all that. And I miss Los Portales. They don't have good Mexican like that. I didn't answer about what we missed.
So in terms of when we moved, I didn't realize how much I had wrapped up my identity in pastoring. And so we got to the field and nobody's coming to ask me to do anything. Nobody even knows we're there. Nobody's certainly seeking us out to do anything. If they had, we wouldn't have been able to speak anyways. They're not asking our opinion about anything. We're not involved in any ministry. And so there was an element of that where I got pretty angry and frustrated about it. And so in terms of what I missed, aside from the normal stuff, I mean, you miss family, you miss the easy stuff of just being able to go to the grocery store and know where stuff actually is and actually know what it is. I spent like an hour because some lady told me there was chili powder at the grocery store in France. There was not chili powder in the grocery store in France. And so stuff like the ease of doing things you miss, but aside from the normal stuff that you would expect of church and family and friends and all that, that was one of the things that I wasn't expecting. I mean, when you miss stuff that you expected to miss, it's one thing. It's still hard. But then whenever you move and you go overseas, there's going to be things that you miss and that you didn't expect. And when that stuff catches you off guard or you haven't thought about it, then that's what can cause problems. In terms of what we miss from France, I miss our church there. One of the more encouraging things that has happened was I was working out in the gym at Union, and I was watching the YouTube of our service from our church back there, and it was great to hear them sing and to listen to it and all that. I mean, French food's pretty good. We can't speak to the wine, but we hear it's good. And so yeah. One more question maybe, and then. Where? Yeah, Barb. Yeah, it's certainly been tested. Yeah, so Barbara's talking about our marriage. Yeah, there were some challenges there. One of the things we were told in training before we get, I forget exactly um, how it was phrased, but essentially, your habitual sins or the things that you struggle with here are only going to be magnified there. And then we arrived there, and about a couple months after arriving, there was some challenges that we had on our team. There was some stuff that happened with our kids, and then we're confined in our apartment that was like a 900 square foot apartment, and there was 6 of us, and we could go out for about an hour a day. It'll test your marriage. It'll it'll test your parenting too. And our kids would tell us they were tested as well. But yeah, the Lord's really gracious in giving us each other, but then also giving us our kids. And so we do see ministry as something that we want our family to participate in. And so it's been really cool over the last year or so to be able to see 2 little girls be able to jump in ministry and to help, be it with translation or trying to share the gospel with their friends, and that not going so well, but them still being faithful in that. And so yeah, the Lord's been really faithful in that. So, all right, thank you guys.
I know you mentioned it several times, but I do hope that it hits in your gut that you are very loved by this group of people. We miss you guys a lot. We pray for you very often, and we miss you. We're going to have a moment where we can pray over them before we leave, but before we do that, I just want to take an opportunity to say, we have these teams that we have put together called missionary advocacy teams. And what they are is just a small group that is dedicated to one of our missionary partners. So the Carothers have a team, the Grays have a team. Every one of our partners has a team. And you are the first line of defense in terms of caring for that missionary partner. So you're in their lives, you know what to pray for and how to pray for them. If there's anything that the congregation needs to know in terms of what we can do to care for them better, you're the ones who are going and getting that information and relaying it to the rest of us. We have open spots for the advocacy team for the Carothers and for several other of our missionary partners as well. You can go to the Welcome Center after this and sign in, or there's a little form you sign up on, and you can turn that in there at the Welcome Center, and we'll get you hooked up. So there were several things that you guys mentioned that we could be praying for. I counted about a dozen that either you explicitly said or we could infer. But I want to take 4. So let's do it this way. There's a gap right here. Everybody to this side of this gap, you're going to be number 1. This section, you're going to be number 2. You guys are number 3, and all you all are number 4. So number 1, what I want you guys to pray for is a local church plant. So to be planted from the church they're in now into this area of town where they live. You guys, I want you to pray for openness to the gospel among the people around them. Number 3, what I want you guys to pray for their time here in the States, that it would do what it is intended to do, that it would give them rest, rejuvenation, but also that they would be sent back well. Western Europe has the highest turnover rate of anywhere in the IMB because of a lot of things that they said. So may they go back, and may they, like he said, stick it out and get some of that credibility with the leaders there. And then this group, pray for people to get saved. They, like he said, they are preaching just like Ezekiel to a 300,000 strong valley of dead, dry bones. Pray for life, okay? Let's take just a moment. Each of you pray for your particular area. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this family. I thank you for the picture of the gospel that is their obedience, how they have left their home and what is regular and comfortable and well known to go to a place where nobody knows who they are, nobody wants them there, all for the sake of their own salvation. That's exactly what your Son did for us, and it is nothing short of Christ-like for them to do the same. I pray that you would bless them and reward them for their obedience. We pray that you would bless them with a vitality in Christ that can't be matched, that they would be close to him, that they would be close to one another. Father, protect them and their marriage and their children. I pray that you would draw their children to yourself young. Save them from the life that could be should they not come to you. And Father, we pray for this people to whom they have been sent. We pray for our existing brothers and sisters who are there, that just as David mentioned, you would raise up oaks of righteousness among the French. That there would be believers who have walked with you arm in arm for years and years, and the holiness of their life would show for it. We pray for new life. We pray that those who right now are walking in darkness, thinking that they have everything all together, that they would be struck by their need for you, and that there would be a Christian nearby, a church nearby, a Bible open, or even David and Nicaea themselves, that they would be close to explain the glorious truths of the gospel. And Father, that you would raise dead people to life. Save. It's what you do. It's what you love to do. And we ask that you would do it. In the name of Jesus, amen. Thank you all for coming tonight. You are dismissed. Have a good evening.